In other words, Mother Earth is a living entity and we have to protect her from the ravages of man. This has already been written into the Constitution for the country of Bolivia, and this is the Earth Rights Institute. They are pushing for that concept along with Global Eco Village and Sustainable Community Network. They also, all of the Earth rights, including many more tenets, are written into something called the Earth Charter. Now here are future citizens of this community. I believe they'll be adequate citizenships and recognize their food citizenship as long, and many of the other things that will be a litany test of what's required for citizenship in that community. Remember at the beginning I talked about this was a religion, and I hope that this particular slide will drive that point home. At some layer of this implementation, I know we have people that are just useless idiots that are implementing it. Some levels we have people that are making money, and then at some level we have the people that reflect the ideology of the 30s and 40s of World War II. And I think these people that now created this Ark of Hope would qualify for that category. This is intended to be a copy of the Ark of the Covenant. It has 4 eyes on either side where you slide the poles through so that you actually don't have to touch the box itself. It had the Earth Charter inside. The Earth Charter contained all of those things that those young children were singing about Mother Earth. It was made from one tree in Germany, shipped over to the New England area, and hand carried down to the meditation room, where this is the photograph of that box sitting in on the pedestal in the meditation room. Gorbachev had this to say about the Earth Charter. He says, "My hope is the Charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a Sermon on the Mount that provides a guide for human behavior toward the environment in the next century." So this truly, in my mind, in my viewpoint, is a religion. Now, I'm getting close to the end here. Here is the National Environmental Policy Act. If you want to know what this graphic is all about, I have a brief explanation of the 2 graphics that I use in prior presentation that you can go and look at. It is essentially the structure of society April the 18th of 1775, because the king actually owned everything. It was on the authority of the church, and the people agreed with that particular situation. April the 19th of 1775, the people said, no, there is only one king but King Jesus, and from that action of that day, the authority of the King of England devolved into every individual in this country. We have all of his authority bestowed on us because of the actions of our forefathers. Now, this National Environmental Policy Act completely reverses this concept, and we haven't understood that we need to have a written rebuttal against this. We really need to send to our elected officials a rebuttal stating this is not indeed the policy of a constitutional government. I'm only going to quote one partial section. This is about 2 pages long. You need to go out and look at it. It holds the tenets of sustainable development way back in 1969. It says that the federal government's responsibility is to ensure for all Americans safe, healthful, productive, and aesthetically and culturally pleasing surroundings. So that's what the country is now set about, what our national government is trying to do to us. Well, I think that the National Environmental Policy Act ought to go where the Bible used to go. Agenda 21 is merely a milestone along this path. It ought to undergird that philosophy. The Council on Environmental Quality, go out to the President's website. On the top of his website, you'll see a series of tabs. On the right-hand side is the tab that takes you to the Council on Environmental Quality, and that council is set up by NEPA, and they are the ones, again, that set up the criteria whether or not a bird has more authority, more rights than you do. I think that ought to go where the church is, or used to be. Of course, the president should actually go where the king used to be, and we now have the Office of Criminal Code Enforcement for EPA. That's another agency under this system. And of course, you've already seen the Environmental Police Force. Well, if you've already got that, can you think that, or wouldn't you think that the political code enforcement officer might not be very far behind? So he ought to go there. And then we have Congress. Well, what has Congress done? Absolutely nothing. It's just a subservient organization in this organizational chart. Coming down to the very end now, here is what is government. And this is the best definition I have seen for a proper definition for government, and it says properly constituted under God's law. Government is a transfer of specific rights and obligations, those designated by the people, to an entity called government. Government becomes a corporation, a legal fiction, an idea that is described in a written format. The written document is a charter, a contract, a constitution that contains the mission statement that spells out the purpose of government. Well, now for the state of Alabama, there is a mission statement. And here it is, Article 1, Section 35. The sole object and only legitimate end of government is not to look forward into the future, determine how many future generations are going to need resources, and then distribute those resources across that timeline. It is not to look at this generation and determine the redistribution adequately and equitably among this generation, nor include species equity. The purpose of government is to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. Now, that phrase would have been well known by the people of the 1700s because it was coined by John Locke. He was the third most quoted individual in the founding era. I have a book of sermons where the pastors of the time speak of the magnificent John Locke. Well, it so happens that Jefferson came along and decided that that phrase was redundant. So he said, well, if you've got life, or if you don't have life, there can be no property. So in that facet, it is redundant. So he substituted pursuit of happiness. And that's the phrase now we've grown up with. Well, I'm going to pose a thought to you that if government will not protect the first aspect of property, among the most innocent among us, they certainly are not going to protect your private property as an adult. Well, what happens when government assumes other functions? It is merely usurpation and oppression. So that's essentially the presentation on Agenda 21.
The Amana colonies in Iowa. Are
Yes.
you familiar with those?
Yes.
It's basically what you've been talking about.
Right.
And through the evolution of the country, they've dissipated back into a regular functioning community now.
Mm-hmm. Let me speak about the Amana colony and other people that want to do this voluntarily is fine with me. It's when they ask for regulations that require me to have higher electrical rates or turn my light off or do whatever they want to. It's a socialist agenda, and I don't appreciate that. So, but I applaud any community that wants to have a sustainable community. As a matter of fact, some of the people in Hohenwald, Tennessee were saying, well, that's not us. You know, that we're wanting to be sustainable in a different manner. And I made the comment to them, I said, well, you've allowed your label and your body of people to be used towards another agenda, and by not defining by what you mean regarding sustainable development, you're participating in furthering this agenda, and they did agree with that. So, sir.
A comment and a question. comment is, I got a kick out of the picture of the new narrow skinny house in the urban infill area, in between the two $50,000 houses. But I was surprised that it had a full width garage. I would have thought it would have been a 3-foot garage where you could have a bicycle to come up the driveway.
Well, while that's true, we don't want to really tell everybody what this is all about up front. You know, if you just have a bicycle rack in the front,
That's a tip-off.
that's a tip-off, right? So,
And a question, what universities are churning out, or have churned out the folks who have written all this
well, there's
information?
one that comes to mind right off the bat is University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. All the way back into the late 90s, they have had a course to teach facilitators and change agents in sustainable development. Their syllabus is online, you can go look them up. Part of that program requires the participants in that process to go out into the community and try to change attitudes towards a specific project, and then come back and report on it in order to qualify for a change agent. So that, I mean, just look up sustainable development in Vanderbilt University, University of Alabama, Auburn. I mean, they're all just involved in this so heavily, it's just unbelievable. And I rather think they're the moving and motivating factor in society more than government, because they churn out people that profess to be conservatives, and yet they'll maybe go into politics or some other field, and they'll adopt all of these rules and regulations because that's what they've been taught.
You know, the guy that Sandy and I went to this food center, we're sitting next to this guy from James Madison University. He's studying sustainable engineering.
Yes.
I mean it's right here in your backyard.
Any, Charles?
Yeah, I have a couple questions and comments. On that virtual Alabama, is that a proposal or is that actually?
No, it's already in use.
From what you showed, it looked like it was a mixture of information that could be collected from ground penetrating radar to
Yes.
show utility lines and stuff like
Yes.
that. Plus, when they showed schools, it looked like it was a combination of databases. You know, it had information from databases that showed floor plans for schools and other facilities
Right.
like that. So is that in fact what it is? It
That's
combines-
my understanding, as to whether or not they can actually, I have been told that the radar can actually look at the furniture arrangement in your house. As to whether or not that's true, I don't know. But it would not surprise me, because this is a number of years old, and all I did was pull out excerpt. There's a lot of fluff and advertisement kind of going. It's about a 5-minute video that I cut it down to about half.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking if it can see the arrangement of furniture, I saw the, what it could see in the school, right?
Yeah.
If it can see that, it can see what you're doing in your house too.
Well, if it can see the pipe underground,
Yeah.
certainly it could look through your roof and determine where the chair is, I guess.
Well, where you are in the
Well,
house.
certainly.
Well, what occurred to me is that, well, another question is, who has access to that database? Does the public have access to it? Or is it
Well,
restricted?
to answer your question, honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm sure that the local communities would have access to it. Any EMA, Emergency Management Authority, would have access, I would
It
think.
just occurred to me, when I saw that floor plan for a school, that's the kind of thing a terrorist could make use of,
Oh,
or
sure.
for other facilities. I
Yeah.
don't know who's
Well,
thinking about those.
Pipelines would be the ideal thing.
I'm
If
sorry?
a pipeline carrying, petroleum across the country. I mean, we have one that runs from New Orleans all the way up the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that information is treated, but it occurs to me that, unauthorized people had access.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I had I was wondering about the range on those RFIDs, in terms of what can be picked up. Do you know that? Is it a technical
Yeah,
question?
well, of course, I don't remember the statistics, but the
Yeah.
RFID chips that are powered can go certainly across a warehouse.
Uh-huh. So there's some that are passive, I assume.
The passive has no battery or no power source internal, so that's your currency. And I don't know, and I don't know about the newest development in these. I don't know, but I know that they are the grain of rice or smaller.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing that occurred to me, one of the things that I found scary was that food policy choices. And if you made a choice that somehow threatened democracy or social justice, and then the question of, okay, well, who's going to determine what threatens democracy? Because that was one of the things, I think that may have been from somebody's dissertation, but That reminds me very much of, there was an article in, it was famous in the Soviet Union, and it was basically anti-Soviet activities, and that's how, yeah, they could be whatever they wanted it to be.
Right.
And that's what's kind of scary about some of this stuff, that if they start having penalties, and, you know, somebody decides what is it that threatens democracy in your food choice, and there's gonna be a penalty, that really sounds like what went on in the Soviet Union, where you could be charged for, you know, under an article that was literally anti-Soviet activities, and they could make it be whatever they wanted it to be.
Those laws are still apparently on the book, because there was some rock and roll band
Oh, yeah.
that was making fun of Putin,
Yeah,
and they were convicted on the charge of hooliganism, which was a Soviet charge,
yeah.
and locked away for I don't know how long. But so the old Soviet Union is still in the new federation.
I'll give you the name of a Soviet child who was turned into a hero. His name was, I'll write his name down, but when you had the slide about people turning each other in for environmental,
Right.
for code violations and stuff, you might want this slide, because his name was Pavlik Morozov. I think it was probably in the 1930s, but he turned his parents in, you know, he informed on his parents, and they were arrested. And he was made into a hero, you know, there's statues to him. I'll write down his name. You might want to have a slide in
Well,
there to show.
Well, now that
The lineage
reminds you,
of that.
I've done some reading on the French Revolution, and that was the first communist revolution. And you actually had to carry around a handwritten endorsement of the new regime, and that you enthusiastically endorsed the new regime. So that it wasn't the Germans, where are your papers? It was the French that really started all this. Now, there was an assemblyman that wanted to demonstrate his enthusiastic support of the new regime ideology, and he brought a toe sack in and threw it on the table that contained the heads of his mother and father.
Yeah,
So he was fully on board with this.
yeah.
One thing that kind of scares me about this whole thing with these chip situation, it would be very easy. They're trying to get this chip thing that would be implanted in you to read your medical history.
Oh, yeah. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, we're trying to protect your health.
Yeah.
And when you have high blood pressure, we can monitor your high blood pressure for you. And should you get high and maybe have a stroke, we could send the EMA to protect you.
Well, the situation would be is how hard would it be to incorporate into that chip a tracking device to figure out where you're going, what you're doing,
Well, for
what's your entire
it's
lifestyle
already there
is.
for Alzheimer's. Yeah, and it's already in your phone, but obviously for Alzheimer's patients, we need to track them so they don't get lost and hurt themselves.
Yep.
So, and this is the map now where I extracted those clips. This is produced by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for the state of Tennessee, and you'll notice the aquatic core area. And the legend for this is right here and goes through all the various colors, and all of this from red to that off yellow, yellow, green, and dark green are all core areas. And then of course land that is outside of it is this particular shade right here. Everything else is kind of boundaries. This is your interconnecting corridor color. So you can kind of see how the state is divided up. Now, my advice to everyone here, if you want this information, go out and get it now, because there is one site associated with this where you put the base map and then you overlay the red or overlay whatever you want to, but that doesn't work. I tried to get the maps because what it would be proportional. In other words, I could pull up and do a screenshot of the base map and then overlay various aspects of this legend, and I wouldn't have to worry with getting the roads in the right place and that kind of thing. And it would also have labels of the various communities, but it doesn't work. Now the data sets are available so that if you want to go out and have the software, GIS software, that would allow you to do that, you can get the raw material and then use that. Now, Charles, you may know somebody that could do that. I think that would be very advisable. I did go ahead and download everything I thought I could use regarding this, and the definitions of the interconnecting corridor and the echo hubs and all that is on the website and describes all of the things that I have gone through here already. So this is the Department of Natural Resources for the state of Virginia. And the reason I say that is because the EPA has pulled the maps that I was using off the internet, and now I can't go back and get other maps that I use for the other southeastern states. So that's why I'm saying get this information while you can, because if groups in Virginia begin to talk about this, they'll pull this off the internet likely.
My dad has a dairy farm that has a creek that runs through it, and it's just, you know, out northern part of Augusta County. And they've come in and told him that he has to fence off this little creek, and they've done it, you know, neighbors up and down.
Right.
And it's hardly, you know, most of the time it's dry. It's not even running much anymore. But if you think about what you're talking about, the land values, you know, that's going to affect the value, because that's a long strip that runs through that property, cuts off one side of the farm from the other, for one thing. And, you know, it's just, it's a ridiculous thing.
It is almost beyond the realm of average individual in society to believe that this is happening and how far it's gone.
Right.
And nobody's speaking of the unintended consequences.
What can you do to fight that? I mean, it's like he's got these people coming out.
Well, there are actual things that you can do. One of them would be to put up a no trespass sign. And this is for Alabama, and there are maximum of laws. Now, do you know what a maximum of law is? It is a correct and proper statement that is long-standing. As long as, there's probably 1,500 maximum of laws that exist. They are frequently well-worded, that are easy to memorize and that kind of thing, that have been used in law, and where they're applicable, they're not refutable. Now, this sign has a maximum of law, and it says, "Every home is a castle. Though the winds of heaven blow through it, officers of the state cannot enter." That's a maximum of law that came down from England to us, and we don't understand that our private property is a castle, and we can restrict the officers of the state from coming onto our private property. But because we allow it to be defined as personal or real, we don't understand the significance of that, and then their code applies to our property. We have to begin to understand those terms again and reapply them in order to reassert our rights rather than privileges under this system. Let me say one thing. If you do put this up, of course you want to follow the state statutes of how it should be put up. Now in Alabama, I don't know of any requirement that you have to put it up on the four corners of your property and then every so many feet. In Tennessee, I think that's true. So if you create a sign like this, of course you're going to want to put the code from Virginia, and you're going to follow all the codes. And what we say or advise people that are thinking about this is to take a newspaper and hold it up beside the sign and take a photograph of that. That gives documentation as to when the sign was actually posted. So then you notarize that statement and you send it to any elected official that may have charge to send a code enforcement officer or any other agent to your property, noticing them that your property is posted private, and he needs to notify you should he desire to come onto your property. Now the reason for that is that the code enforcement officers in Florida have torn the sign down. There was no documentation, and it was the owner's word against the code enforcement that it was ever there. So this gives you further standing in court should someone come to your property and you can claim that there was criminal trespass, whereas otherwise you couldn't.
Okay, what do you do with the farmer that's dealing with the Google Earth satellite, checking out your property every day to make sure your manure is covered, that your cows are where they're supposed to be? They're not going to see the trespassing sign. They just beam.
Right, and they're gonna want to come onto your property to inspect. Well, the very first thing is you're going to want to know where their jurisdictional authority is to come onto your property. After all, they're an agent of the federal government. They're not an agent of the state government, and there's a jurisdictional fence there. And if we begin to understand the difference between, and I probably should pull up the slides, but in most of the state constitutions, it says "we the people," and it is a small p, common noun. There are some anomalies. Tennessee is one of them. Virginia is not. It says "we the people," and you don't have a preamble in your state constitution. We do in ours, and it says "we the people," and it goes on and describes our Bill of Rights and other things in our state constitution. Now, the authority of the king devolved into the common people. That references the common people because it's a common noun. And you go to the federal constitution, it says "we the people," a capital P. That doesn't reference you and I, that references the agents of the state government. There were 13 original free and independent states that came into existence in the Treaty of Paris. Those 13 states sent their representatives, who are reflected in the language of "we the people," and they represent the state governments, created a government of the United States for a specific territory, which is 10 miles square, that resides in Washington, D.C. It is the military post and the needful buildings that are required to maintain all of that is their jurisdiction. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 and 18 says that the federal government has all authority to write rules and regulations for the people of the United States, and that's 10 mile square area. When Roberts wrote that the United States could force someone into buying something, he wasn't talking about the people that live in the Commonwealth or the people that live in the Republic, Alabama. He was talking about the people that live in Washington, D.C. He made a proper ruling. But since we don't understand the meaning of commas and colons and capitalization in legal documents, we think that it applies to us.
So Google Earth can only be used by the federal government? I mean,
Google Earth can be used by anybody that has access to the information.
But then so you're saying that the state can't utilize that and
This-
just go ahead and fine you based on Google Earth?
Well, the thing is that in Article 1, Section 9 of the Alabama Code, it says that the Code of Alabama shall not affect the right, remedy, or defense of the citizens of the state of Alabama. So we can write all the codes we want to determine the manure on your property from livestock and where it is, but if you have a right to private property, we can't affect that because your private property is a separate jurisdiction from that of the state. Remember, the authority of the king devolved into the people. We have that private jurisdiction. And the state, just like this says, the state doesn't have the authority to come into your jurisdiction and affect anything that you do, as long as it's a right. But now if we extend a privilege to you, that's a different story. And because the definition found in the first section of the Alabama Code defines property as personal or real, and we don't understand that our property is not personal or real, and we allow it to be defined as that, then we allow the code to be applied to our private property. And we need to begin to make the distinction again that property is private. Now, the best example of how to explain that, I think, is one Supreme Court case that was held in, or was presented in the 1960s. There was an individual that was being followed by the FBI, and he went into a phone booth in a mall and he closed the door. As we all know, the young man here may not know what a phone booth is. Phone booths had glass walls in it. You could see through a phone booth. And the FBI wiretapped him and used the information in the case against him and won a conviction. He took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy when he closed the door, and therefore the agent of the government could not see into his jurisdiction. Now, let me, and I usually go through the slides, but since I'm here, let me talk about it a little more. In our system that was established April the 19th of 1775, which was by action of people, it was not something that anybody sat down and wrote about. It was later that the actions of people had to be reflected in the legal writings. Now, what occurred is that we placed Jesus in the place of the earthly king. The grantor was God the Father, and we are the beneficiary. Those rights are extended to us and are unalienable, meaning that the entity of government does not have the authority to place a lien against that which the Creator has granted to us. You disavow that and you're saying, I am no longer an American, because that is a concept published in the first document of the American people. It is not an opinion that I hold, and it is self-evident. In other words, I don't have to tell you, all you got to do is look around. This thing is created by someone that has a far greater reach than we can imagine. He is the architect of the universe, and he has bestowed each and every one of us with certain unalienable rights. If you go to the French Revolution and look up their rights, they are inalienable, inherent rights. And our system taught that the only thing inherent in man is a sinful and degenerate nature. Now, if you follow the inalienable right concept, you will find that the United Nations use it every time they talk about rights. It's inalienable. And those rights, by legal definition, are those rights which you can give away. I can't give away what the Creator has granted to me. Neither can I transfer that right. But I can transfer certain obligations to an entity called government and expect them to uphold that which the Creator has granted to me. Now, I can't see into the jurisdiction of God the Father. I can't even see His footstool. So the entity that we have created, as stated in that Supreme Court case, and as stated right there, the agent can't see into our jurisdiction because we are its creators. Now, as long as I don't affect the rights of any of the other people, and by the way, I'm not saying the code doesn't affect us, because if I violate the rights of another individual, that person has the perfect obligation and responsibility to go to our government and in an affidavit say, I have had my rights violated by my neighbor. I want you to look into this. I have a witness that has come forward. And here now is the law that he violated, the damage I suffered, and an unbiased witness. Look into it, government agent. Goes right back to Romans 13, verse 4, 5, or 6. And the government then has a responsibility to look into the tenets of this and determine whether or not there is validity in it, and then cause me to make the situation right. Now that's the system we have, and we've got to begin to learn how to reassert that system so that it's no longer a commercial enterprise between us and them, and they're extracting fees and everything else from us.
Now, can you explain that when you say assert, that's a legal concept, latches and things like that?
Well, for instance, the comprehensive plan is a policy statement. And if we don't assert that it violates our rights extended to us from the Creator, it stands. And if, for instance, in adverse possession, the Supreme Court of Alabama says that if you possess a parcel, the rights to a parcel of land for 20 years, no one has the authority to come and rebut or object to those title to that property. So in this case, if we allow a comprehensive plan which obviously incorporates sustainable development and violates the rights granted to us by the Creator, after a period of time, let the dog lie, is the saying. And we have no authority to come and rebut or object to what has been on the books for a long time. I hope that's Charles.